In episode 4 of SMS Ages, I mentioned that part of the reason for doing this series was to explore the Master System games that I'd previously overlooked. F-16 Fighter, or F-16 Fighting Falcon as it was called in the US and Japan, is most certainly one of those games. I cannot say if it was the genre, the graphics, or something else, but I've never really given F-16 Fighter a chance. Let's hope it turns out to be a pleasant surprise in the same vein as Pit-Pot. F-16 Fighter was released on the 22nd of December 1985 in Japan. It was actually released the same day as Super Tennis and Transbot as part of the end-of-year games push. The Sega card release of F-16 Fighter would make its way to the US in October of 1986 and Europe throughout 1987. As was the case with most European card games, it would also see a later re-release on a standard cartridge in time for the Master System Model 2. F-16 Fighter is the closest thing we've seen to third-party support on the system to date. The game was originally developed by Nexa and released for the MSX series of computers, before being picked up by Sega, who reprogrammed the title and published it on the Master System themselves. As we'll see in the future, this would become a common practice by Sega to overcome Nintendo's kind of grip on third-party licensees. The game's MSX origins may also explain another of the game's oddities, namely its incompatibility with the Sega Mega Drive when using the Power Base converter. For those that don't know, the Power Base converter is essentially a cartridge port adapter that lets you use Master System cards and cartridges in the Sega Mega Drive. The Mega Drive itself actually does contain the majority of the Master System hardware as part of its innards, so the only thing prohibiting playback of Master System titles normally is the shape of the cartridges. The reason that F-16 Fighter doesn't work on a Power Base is because it uses the Master System's legacy video mode that was intended to provide backwards compatibility with SG-1000 titles. This video mode is absent from the Mega Drive, so the game won't be able to display anything. F-16 Fighter is the only official Master System game to use the legacy video mode, so players with a Mega Drive looking to play Master System titles aren't going to miss out on too many titles. Anyway, back to the game. The game itself is an aerial combat simulator where you pilot an F-16 and have to take down a series of enemy MiG-25s. The game doesn't burden itself with a story, but since it's the 80s, I think we can assume it's a typical America versus Russia affair. I have a tendency to dive straight into retro games, and I must confess, I took that approach the first time I tried F-16 Fighter. This proved a massive mistake though, as I couldn't figure out the controls at all. It turns out F-16 Fighter actually requires two controllers to play properly. Movement and weapons are primarily handled on the first controller, while speed, targeting, defense, and autopilot are handled on the second controller. That is a remarkably complex setup compared to most console games of the era, and rather amusingly, the manual acknowledges this by saying, when you've tried crashing and burning, come back and finish reading the manual to learn how to play the game properly. Okay, message understood. I shall read the manual in future. There are 10 levels to the game, and at the start of each level you are shown how many enemies you have to destroy, as well as the number of enemies that can appear at once, ranging from 1 to 3. You can actually select any level you want from the get-go, but for newcomers you really do want to stick to the first level in order to wrap your head around the control scheme. Once airborne, you have to track down enemies using the telemetry, data and radar. When you find an enemy, you can either use your machine gun or missiles to try and take him down. Missiles can take down an enemy immediately, but are limited and require a lock-on to really be sure that you're going to hit. They can also then, even if you have a lock-on, be blocked using the electronic countermeasure. So you end up really having to rely more on your machine gun, since it has more ammo and can be fired at will, but it does require more hits to down an enemy. Ultimately, you'll end up using both in order to complete each level. You'll also need to be mindful of the enemy location, especially when there's more than one, as your defense is largely limited to your own electronic countermeasure system, and, in my case at least, I'm pretty crap at using that. In the end, F-16 Fighter did surprise me. It's far closer to a simulation experience than I would have ever expected from a Master System title, and for that it does deserve plaudits. The problem is that the game is quite repetitive, and I never found myself wanting to continue past the first few stages, since when you've downed a few planes, you've largely seen everything the title has to offer. For that reason, I wouldn't really recommend F-16 Fighter to people today, but it is so common you may wish to try it out for the novelty factor alone. Just remember to read the manual first.
Thanks for watching SMS Ages. If you like this episode, then why not try some of the other episodes or other content on the channel? And perhaps like, subscribe, and share to help spread the word.
Next time on SMS Ages, we delve into a sports title that is so good, the great moniker just isn't good enough.